So I've got a lot of charts and graphs and data I want to share with you guys today. Before we get into that, I want to talk about kind of the two big political talking points of the moment. So um, we have the big beautiful bill, and I think you've heard all of us joke and laugh that we think it's kind of silly all these names that the president or Congress puts on these bills. But we got the big beautiful bill. And then there's a lot of talk from Trump about trying to get rid of Chairman Powell. So I want to talk about those, and then we'll get into charts and graphs of the market. So first of all, okay, so the big beautiful bill, right? It's passed the House. It is currently being debated in the Senate. I would expect it's going to pass. You don't bring those things for a vote unless you feel like you have the votes. It's a really embarrassing look if you bring it up for a vote and your party controls the presidency, the Senate, and the House, and it doesn't pass. So I'd imagine it passes. Not going to give you guys my opinion too much on the bill itself, but here's what the market is going to say. So it makes permanent a lot of the tax cuts that Trump passed in his first term in 2017 that Biden actually never got rid of. It didn't increase taxes, just kind of left the status quo. It makes some of those tax cuts permanent. It also includes tax cuts for some of the things Trump ran on, like the no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security. So that was a conversation within our office the other day because some people don't understand what it means for no taxes on Social Security. So Social Security is not taxable unless you make over a certain amount of income. And if you make above a certain amount of income, so let's say you're still working and you can receive Social Security, or you have investment income or other income like pensions, part of Social Security can be taxable. So for all of us loan officers on the call, when we're qualifying someone with Social Security, you guys might have heard us use the term grossing up their income. If someone makes $1,000 a month and it's not taxable, we actually give them credit for 25% above that or $1,250. That's if it's not taxable. But some people, Social Security is taxable. And so that's kind of a big political talking point. So that's included. Um, the detractors of the bill will point out that the Congressional Budget Office and others have projected that it could be inflationary because it could lead to continued government deficits. And on this call, I've talked about that a lot over the past 6 months or 2 years or ever since we started doing this. I'm going to share a chart here real quick with you guys. And let me just pull it up. Well, you know what? I don't know if I have it pulled up, but you know what? I actually do. So let me share my screen real quick and we'll pop into this. So um, we have a major government deficit problem. I think we all know that. We spend too much money, spend more than we bring in. That is inflationary. That is certainly a cause for higher interest rates. But we don't really have a revenue problem. We really have a spending problem. And so this chart here shows that government spending has gone from 1.8 trillion in 2000, and it hovered in the threes and fours for about 15 years post financial crisis. Can you guys see my screen okay, Duba?
Yeah, we're good.
It's a good size. But then it ballooned during COVID up to $6 trillion, but it hasn't come down. And you would have thought that we increased spending during COVID when, government was paying people who couldn't work and their businesses were shut down. You would have thought at the time, and we were kind of told at the time, and this is during kind of end of Trump's first term, beginning of Biden's, kind of both administrations, that we'll get spending back in line, but it hasn't happened, right? And the projections are that we will continue to increase spending. And that's because we've got this snowball effect happening where the more we spend, the greater deficits we run, the more we have to borrow. The more we borrow increases the interest expense on all the debt we have, which makes the deficit worse, and so on and so forth. And so if you think about someone using a home equity line of credit to pay for their lifestyle, right? A home equity line of credit to pay for their food and their gas and their living expenses and their rent. At some point, that home equity line of credit is going to get tapped out, okay? And it's going to cost more and more interest. And so what our government's done for, gosh, the past 20, 30, 40 years is they've just continued increasing that home equity line of credit, which is the debt ceiling, And each time they increase that, they borrow more. That home equity line of credit balance goes up. Now they have more interest to pay, and so on and so forth. And it's not a political thing. It's everyone who is elected in DC and those that are unelected. But just tying back the kind of the big beautiful bill, the detractors will say it doesn't help with the deficit. It's a tax cut bill, not really a spending reduction bill, and there are some spending reductions within there. So anyway, I would expect it would pass. The detractors will point out that it could lead to bigger deficits, bigger deficits, more government spending, more government spending, more inflation, not good for mortgage rates. What'll be interesting to see is if the bill passes, what kind of spending cuts could they pass over the next month, quarter, years to offset some of the potential reductions in government revenue. The people for the bill will point out that tax cuts should stimulate the economy. If the economy is growing, if businesses are bringing more revenue in, if people are making more money, that'll increase the revenue the government brings in taxes. And so you're going to have this battle of tax cuts will bring in more revenue or tax cuts will cause more expenses. And like most political things, it's going to be right down the middle. One side's going to say one side's going to say the other. But what we should all be looking for is how does the market react to the bill passing? I would expect that to happen sometime midweek. The president really wants it passed before 4th of July, so I think you're going to see it passed on Wednesday or Thursday, most likely. But then how does the market react to that? This week, like most things, the market anticipates what's going to happen, and the market reacts in advance of something happening because they can project what'll happen. So for example, before the Fed cuts the Fed funds rate, the market has already priced it in and reacted to it. So I don't think you're going to get a huge market reaction this week because the market's kind of priced in that the bill's being going to be passed. But if there's any changes to the bill when it goes back to the House, if it doesn't pass, if it gets delayed, there could be some market reaction. So certainly something for us to watch this week. Um, the second bit of political news that's out there is the president has been pushing for Jerome Powell to cut interest rates or maybe even replace Jerome Powell. His term is not up for another year. So Jerome Powell, Fed chairman, is not going anywhere. Um, I think most of us probably agree, and I feel like he hasn't been a great Fed chairman. He was late to hiking rates when inflation started to spike post COVID. He famously used the term inflation was transitory or temporary, and we all know, everybody in this call, that it was not. So he was a little bit late there. And Trump loves nicknaming people, and so I think he started calling him Too Late Pal. Um, and then he was a little bit early cutting last fall. So he cut the Fed funds rate for the first time last fall, and inflation spiked. And so Chairman Powell is very, very reluctant to cut the Fed funds rate again because he did it a little bit prematurely last fall. Those of you guys who are on the call know, like, I like Trump. I voted for him. I don't like what he's doing with pressuring Chairman Powell to cut the Fed funds rate. I think they need to keep the Fed as independent as possible. So I'm not a fan of some of the rhetoric and language they're using to try to force his hand. I think the Fed will cut when the Fed needs to. That said, he hasn't done a great job. So I understand where the president's coming from, trying to force his hand because he was wrong hiking in 2021 and 22, and he was probably a little early cutting in 2024. So there's not a great track record there of Chairman Powell. But again, should the president be pressuring the Fed chairman publicly to cut the Fed's funds rate? Yeah, probably not. That said, and I'm going to share my screen again. The Fed's going to do what the Fed's going to do, and the market is going to dictate what the Fed does. And we have seen really good signs of cooling inflation over the past few months, and we talk about that on this call every week here. The next Fed meeting is July 30th, and right now, expectations are 81% of people expect no Fed rate cut. But September 17th, which is the meeting after that, so we're 12 weeks away from that, you have 95% roughly of people expecting the Fed to be cutting by them. Some think they'll have a quarter rate cut, 76.8. And about 18% of people think there will be a half a point cut to the Fed funds rate by September. So Trump's trying to push Chairman Powell to do it sooner. I think he would prefer July. I think Chairman Powell would prefer September. We'll see where it lands. It's going to be market dependent. But we've had good news on inflation. And even though the Fed funds rate does not directly impact mortgage rates, the factors that would cause the Fed to start cutting are factors that will lower mortgage rates. Lower mortgage rates, we all know, improves affordability and should stabilize home prices. The last bit of economic news we got last week, on Friday, we got the PCE, the personal consumption expenditure. That's the Fed's favorite measure of inflation. We just got that on Friday. It came in at 1.1% for May, 2.3% year over year. The Fed's target is 2, so we're getting close. And so I think another 30 to 45 days of positive news on inflation will kind of hammer home that the Fed's going to cut in September. Um, these percentages actually increased from about 80 to over 93, 94% of a September Fed rate cut after the PCE was released last Friday. So that feels like the direction we're trending, is that we're probably going to get a Fed rate cut sometime in September. Um, the other thing that's happening with Trump and Chairman Powell, and this is interesting, is because Chairman Powell is not managing monetary policy the way the president wants. He's talked of naming his successor many, many months in advance. So there's hawkish Fed members or policy, and there's dovish. Dovish meaning lower rates, not fighting inflation as hard. Hawkish means higher rates, really fighting inflation. If Trump were to announce the next Fed chairman to replace Powell when his term's up next year over the next few months, which there's talk that he might do that, if he announces a dovish Fed governor to take over the role of Fed chairman, the market will react to that. The market prices things in before it happens. You've heard me use the term "buy on the news," and so buying on the news would mean if Trump announces a new Fed chairman to take over for Powell when his term ends next year, that's dovish, meaning more likely to cut rates. The market's going to immediately react to that before it actually happens. So that's something that's really interesting to watch is, do we get the announcement of a Fed chairman? I don't think it's going to happen in the next month or two, but August, September, we're 6, 8 months from Chairman Powell's term being up. You could see the president do that. I'm not sure if it'll get that far because I think once they start cutting at the next Fed meeting, September 17th, if indications are they're going to do that, then Trump might not make an announcement 6 months in advance. But interesting and something certainly for all of us to watch. Okay, let me turn to the current market. So, do you all remember what happened to the stock market earlier this year when the tariffs were initially announced? Okay, so give me a verbal or in the chat. What happened to the stock market when we first announced tariffs, which the president called Liberation Day? Okay, so what happened to the stock market? Anybody remember?
Everyone thought the sky was falling.
Okay, it tanked, right? Okay, we were in a bear market. It was down 20%. Okay. And what did a lot of your customers do? Okay. They freaked out. All right. I had a guy that's 32 years old that had a nice little nest egg in his 401k and literally said, I'm putting my purchase on hold because my 401k. And my answer to him was like, one, you're 32 years old. You're 30 some odd years from needing the money in your 401k. And certainly markets ebb and flow, and you would expect over 100-year history of the stock market, it's going to bounce back, right? Um, but it's a good kind of indicator of how people think because when times get when there's turmoil, people panic and they freeze, and it's a fight or flight mentality, and they just stop. And the easiest reaction is, I'm going to do nothing. And so this person, first time home buyer, very well qualified. His reaction was fight or flight. I'm scared. The market's down. I'm just going to pull back rather than seeing it as, hey, this could be an opportunity. Maybe I should buy more and invest more in the stock market, buy it cheap. maybe I should go buy real estate now versus waiting 3 months or 6 months or a year when there's a lack of competition. And so people react to those things differently. I think it's our job to explain to our customers how every market shift presents opportunities, and we want to be the ones to educate people on how to take advantage of those opportunities. And so, Rhett, you said it, the market tanked. So this chart here shows the last five bear market cycles where the market went down by more than 15%. The 2025 short-term bear market was the fastest recovery from where the market started, down 15% and back up to where it was before. And I think Friday we touched like an all-time high on the S&P. And that's not a political, nobody's policy impacted that. That's just what the market does. The market sold off of fear of tariffs. We talked about this a lot back in March and April that they were likely to be used as a negotiating tactic. That's played out as truth. It was all negotiations. And the markets now has read that and the market has rebounded. So after, the doom and gloom of March, skies falling, tariffs, market sells off 15% very quickly, took less than 30 days. We've bounced back, and it was 75 days from start to finish. Really 45 for the market to rebound because it took about 30 for it to sell off. And so I bring this up because we're going to start hearing people talk about the real estate market. Our home values falling, sales are lagging. Is it a good time to buy? It was a great time to buy stocks earlier this year because you could buy it at a discount. And that should compare to the real estate market for all of us. And if we want to use examples for customers, people who purchase stocks at a cheap level in April and May have done really, really well. And the same will prove true in real estate over the next 3, 6, 9 months. Buy real estate cheap. We know when interest rates come down, which we're certainly trending that direction, that'll bring upon more demand. That seller buyer supply and demand imbalance will correct itself. And you could see home prices go back up. At a minimum, you're going to see them stabilize. And so I think telling the story to customers of what happened with the stock market earlier this year is a story that we can project to happen with the real estate market over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. So if you guys want a copy of any of these charts and graphs, as always, just message whoever you work with on our team. We'll get these in your hand. But this one was really interesting. I wanted to share a few other things just related to the current market that we're seeing. Um, I pulled this over the weekend because this differentiates between single family homes and condos. And I know a lot of us are in Florida and we've got a big condo market that's become challenging the last couple of years with insurance and condo approvals and structural integrity and deferred maintenance and repairs. And so this is a nationwide number, but single family homes are at a 4.38 per month supply nationwide. Condos are at 6.67. To me, just a good barometer to kind of explain the difference between the two, especially if you're in a market where you have both. Certainly, South Florida, anyone on the call from South Florida, Central Florida, anywhere in the coast, high number of condos, more days on market for condos versus single family. And you can see that even during the crash of '08, you saw that gap widen where condos went to a 14-month supply where single family, peaked around 10. And so you're about a 2 month supply of condos greater than you are of single family homes. Part of that's the number of listings on the market. Part of that is the number of people purchasing condos. I know it's just gotten difficult um, for people to get condos approved. Kind of brief sidebar. If you guys haven't worked with us on condos, like I would venture to say that cross country is better than any lender in the country at condos. We have an internal department that runs the show that does it all. The last one, we closed a condo about 4 or 5 days ago. So June 23rd or 4th in Satellite Beach, Florida, kind of East Coast beach town. The loan was clear to close, condo approval and everything, 17 calendar days before closing on a 30-day contract. We got it approved and clear to close in like 13 days for a 30-day close. Um, we have internal portfolio programs that can do non-warrantable condos. We can do condos with issues with vacancy, too many investors versus owner occupants. We've done where there's defects like structural integrity. So if there's a non-warrantable condo or something that another lender says no to, decent chance it's going to be a yes for us, and we'll figure it a way how. So um, don't run from condos. I think there's good opportunities as long as it's affordable with with whatever the HOA fees are. Um, okay, so a couple other charts I want to share with you guys. So this is the MBA's mortgage application index. So this is seasonally adjusted. It's just kind of a running average of the number of purchases in a given market. And I just wanted to point this out because the light red line is 24, the dark red line is 25. Earlier this year, we were behind pace of what the market looked like in 24. But really, since March, the pace of transactions and sales in 25 is ahead of 2024's pace. Um, it doesn't feel like we're in a robust market, although it's, I think most of us are pretty busy right now. And it's we've certainly outpacing 2024. Um, and then last chart I've got here, and this is just again something for the buyers that have kind of panicked about the current market. And you guys have seen various versions of this. This was just a more recent one I pulled from Realtor.com, but um, net worth of homeowners versus renters, 19, 22, and then estimated 25. And you can just see that gap continues to widen. So this is something that I think we should continuously share with our customers. Um, there's a few trends that we're seeing. There's certain paces, segments of the market, like first-time home buyers, that are certainly lagging. They're more impacted by higher interest rates, higher prices, and affordability concerns. There's certain segments of the market, and you guys have heard us talk about it, that are really, really kind of cranking along at a pretty good pace right now. Um, Anytime there's a segment of the market where there's opportunity, it's something we should all talk about. And to me, the two biggest opportunities for us to pick up business that other realtors and lenders aren't chasing are investors and what we call non-QM loans. So we're doing about 25% of all of our transactions right now are investor, non-owner occupied. Some conventional loans, some DSCR, some bank statement, but investors, and that's smart investors, smart money, picking up multiple properties. I know Aaron had one that did multiple. I've had one that's done multiple. A lot of the investors that our teams work with are purchasing multiple properties, two, three, four properties for the same investor. Um, so we've been talking about investors more. It's something to post on social media more, create videos and reels more. The more you talk about something like that, the more you're going to attract it. And so we feel like investors are a big opportunity. That smart money, let me buy a house at a discounted price when there's a lack of competition. The other opportunity that we see is non-QM loans, and that's about 25% of what we're doing now. So like half of what we do is investor and non-QM. And so what is non-QM? DSCR investor loans are a piece of that, but bank statement loans. As we've started doing more and more bank statement loans, and the interest rates on those there's very, very minimal difference between a conventional mortgage for somebody with good credit. JJ just did one for 1.7 million up in the Panhandle about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Um, what we've noticed is bank statement loans have a higher average sale price or loan amount than a traditional mortgage. And so that's something I would encourage all of you when you're on social media, promote that you work with self-employed buyers that might have had trouble getting qualified by another lender, or um, hey friends, if you are self-employed and you write off a lot of your income, I have a lender that can help you out, and then connect them with someone on our team. We're doing a lot of those right now. And those people are people that maybe were told no by another lender in the past because they supplied tax returns and they didn't qualify, or maybe bank statement interest rates were higher with other lenders or in the past than they are today. There's not a big difference in rate between a conventional loan and a bank statement loan for someone with good credit. And so we see those two areas as really, really big opportunities. And if you follow any of us on social media, you'll see us continuing to talk about that. Um, okay, the last thing I've got, I just want to walk you through the economic calendar of the week because we do have some news, even though it's a short week. So let me share my screen again and we'll jump into that. I see a couple questions in the chat, so I will make sure we get those covered as well. Dude, but I think there's a hometown heroes one if you want to.
Yep.
I think that's the one we got. So, okay, so tomorrow at 9:30, Chairman Powell's testifying again. The big news of the week this week, the jobs report. It's typically the first Friday of the month, but the Friday is July 4th, Independence Day. So they've moved it up a day, which is interesting because usually they move it back a week, but they moved it up a day. So we get non-farm payrolls, aka the jobs report, this Thursday. Um, I would expect a number that's very moderate, not negative, but not great. Nothing to celebrate, but not a negative number, kind of like we've seen for most of the past 12 to 18 months. One thing I don't talk about much, but it'll be interesting to watch within that report is what increase month over month or year over year you see with incomes. Um, if the jobs report is weak and average incomes are going down, that'll be something interesting to watch. Um, Lower incomes will lower inflation, and I think you might see that on Friday. So we would expect pretty good news in the bond market this week. If the bill passes, the market's priced it in. We think you're going to have a weaker jobs report like we've had for the past 18 months, kind of trending in kind of a weaker direction. And we've had some good news on inflation. And so this week, we should see interest rates improving. I would say ever so slightly, would not expect a massive decrease in interest rates. We don't want a big decrease in rates. We want slow and steady, moderate improvement. And if we look at the chart here, so I'm just going to go back over the past 6 months. You can see that the bond market bottomed out in May, and we've been on a really nice run since May 22nd. So we're about 45 days in, roughly, of a positive movement in the bond market. We're getting really close to approaching levels that we saw earlier this year in April. That was right before the tariff fight happened. So just like the stock market has kind of regained the ground it lost after the stock market sold off, the bond market sold off starting in April as well, and we've regained almost all of that ground. A couple more days of positive news, we'll get there. I've shared charts and graphs with you guys before that there's a direct correlation between rates going down and mortgage application activity or home purchase contract activity going up. And that trend, I think, will continue. Maybe not through the 4th of July weekend, but if we get good news this week and we see a dip in rates next week, I'd expect a surge in activity for the second half of the summer. So, for the most part, all positive news on the interest rate side of things. It looks like we've got a couple questions in here. So hometown heroes and Duba or Rhett, you guys want to take that one? Because I know you guys posted. Rhett, you want to grab that because you posted something on it last week.
Yeah, on Hometown Heroes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, last we checked, I mean the funds have basically been approved, but there's not a start date yet to the program. At least the last update I saw. But the biggest changes, which was the changes that we were trying to warn people of before, you know, getting on the mountaintop and praising hometown heroes as the silver bullet to to jumpstart your business. Everyone was thinking there was going to be $100 million and it was going to be open to all first-time home buyers, and that just is not the case, unfortunately. They've made some major changes, but now it is 50 million that is going to be available, and it's back to the original guidelines of when the program first started, where it's going to be only open to like first responders, teachers, government employees. So we're still waiting on the specific list of, all the jobs that do qualify. So just kind of hang tight. As soon as we have, new information, y'all be the first to know.
And we've been talking about this and kind of prepping everybody in Florida for this for the last 45, 60 days. We actually like the limitation to certain industries. It'll make the program support the people that it was initially intended to support when it first rolled out a couple years ago. So the teacher, firefighter, first responder, veteran that it was initially targeted to is really probably who it should benefit. What we noticed over the past couple years is there was a lot of people that were outside those industries that didn't need hometown heroes. They had plenty of cash to put down. There were people putting down 10% and then getting hometown heroes funds on top of that. And that's why
Mhm.
the money was gone like that. I mean, last year it was gone like in a blink of an eye, 30, 45 days it was gone. So um, an official rollout date hasn't been announced yet. It's only $50 million, but we think it's going to last longer than it did in the past, even at half the funding amount, because it's targeted to specific groups. So we think it'll last longer and it'll benefit the people that really need the funds for their down payment, not people that had plenty of money to put down and were just taking advantage of like a $20,000 interest-free loan. The changes are probably good. No official date on that just yet. Um, and like JJ said, if you're in Florida, there's been a bond program that's great, that's been around forever, and most states have a version of that. Um,
Yeah,
Sherry, you
Mike, real
mentioned,
quick, just
go
to
ahead. Yeah.
piggyback off that, I mean, just like you're saying, there are other programs. We have a contract that we're working with currently that the gentleman wasn't going to get qualified for Hometown Heroes, even if the funds were available right now. But because of, his score was a decent score, about a 700. Um, but he's still, first time home buyer. The On a standard conventional loan, his rate was going to be more so toward the mid sevens, and then also with higher mortgage insurance. But because he was still under the income limit for the it's called the e-housing TBA plus program through Freddie Mac. What we're doing for him is getting him a 7.375 rate, which we haven't actually locked it in because we think rates might improve a little bit. So we might even get him to 7.25. But what's really nice is that he's going to get 3% of his loan amount to go toward his down payment and closing costs, and it is a forgivable loan. So it's going to be
Hmm.
zero interest, and it for as long as he has the home, but every year the amount owed back reduces by 20%. So after 5 years, he owes nothing on that assistance. And other benefits of that program are on the bond programs and the programs of e-housing, they waive the transfer taxes and stamps on the mortgage. So normally that would be about a 0.5% of your loan amount as a fee that's on pretty much every standard transaction, but on the programs through the state, they waived that. So that's going to save him another $1,700 on top of, getting a better rate than what current market is and a forgivable loan. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there's plenty of options out there. Every bar was going to be a different scenario. And you just, got to make sure that your loan officer knows all the options.
I think the message for all of us is lack of funds should not prevent someone from buying a house. We typically tell people there's three things you need to buy a house, and if you have two of the three, you can probably qualify: your income, your credit, and your assets. If you have decent credit and decent income, you don't need a lot of cash. If you have a lot of cash and good credit, but you can't show your income, there's options. And so if you have two of those three, credit, cash, or income. If you have two of those three, there's a mortgage out there for you. Um, all right, guys, a couple minutes over. We'll let you jump off. Sherry, you had a question about renovation financing and a flyer. We can definitely get that to you. Um, we did a class here a week or two ago. Some really cool things you can do with renovation loans. If you guys have listings that are sitting that maybe need a little bit of TLC, get with whoever you work with on our team. Let us show you how renovation loans can work because we can show some renderings of like what this house would look like with a brand new kitchen. Um, so if that's something that you're seeing in, listing inventory that you have that's not moving, that's an option that could be attractive. So with that, guys, have a great day. Have a great week. Jobs report on Thursday, the big news to watch, the big beautiful bill. What happens with that? We'll see how that impacts the market. I think it's going to pass. So big news week this week at the end of the week. And then we get to shoot off some fireworks on Friday night. So have a great day. Have a great week. We will see you guys next Monday, and we'll talk to you then. Thanks, everybody.